Hello there, it's Paul here and welcome everyone. This video, before I probably get started on it into explaining everything, is all about how you would hopefully, this is going to be my first time, replace the belt, or in my case, replace the bearings, which is a very similar process, on the Axminster AT406WL. Axminster renamed all their lathes a little while ago, so I believe what it used to be was called the AT1628VS. Now their trade lathes may be all very similar, so this may apply to other machines, and certainly if not, there might even be other makes as well. That gives you a good idea of what needs to be done. The first thing before you do any work on the lathe, obviously other than switching it off anyway, is check if you've got any paperwork and everything like that for it, because Axminster do these drawings, total schematic breakdown of the lathes for all of their lathes as far as I'm aware. If you bought the lathe second hand and you don't have that, I believe that they should all be on their website, so certainly go and have a look, because it is so useful to have, and it's hopefully told me of all the pieces that I need to do. Why do I need to change the bearings? If you follow me, you'll know that I've only had the lathe for about 4 months now, and you're probably thinking straight away, well, that's really poor quality, having a lathe where the bearings need to be replaced after 4 months. Well, they're small moving parts, probably very cheap as well, a couple of pounds each, so these things will break from time to time. Why do I think it's the bearings? Well, I was doing a project on this at the weekend and I started getting a knocking sound, and I thought, well, anybody who knows these lathes, they run very quietly, especially compared to the old lathe I had. So it was a bit worrying, and I stopped, did a little bit of investigating, and then I gave Axminster a call on the Monday morning, spoke to the technical department, ran through all the things I tried and all my findings, and he more or less agreed, yeah, it sounds like one of the bearings. In the lathe here, the access cover here for the belt is just held on with a bolt there, where you just need a 4mm Allen key, so that's quite easily open. There's no micro switches on this, so the lathe will run with that open, so just be careful. There are 3 sets of bearings in here. There is one literally behind the nut on the end here, in the end on that end, and as far as I'm aware, there are 2 sets of bearings this end, and one I think probably is on the end here via the spindle, and one further in. Might be spaced, might be a lot closer together, I'm not sure until I really get into it to have a look. So the knocking, if I put the lathe on, I don't know whether you'll actually hear this. What I'll do, I'll just move my microphone a lot closer to the lathe just to see if you can actually hear the knocking. It's just more annoying than anything. It's something that shouldn't really be happening. The lathe should run really quietly, and the way I ascertained that it was down to the bearings was that I took the belt off, because the motor end is that end, so that just the motor was running, and you start the motor up and it's running really quietly like it should do. The moment this belt was on, it doesn't matter which one of these drive wheels you put it on, for the slow speed or the higher speed, you still get the knocking sound in there, and it's hard to really point precisely which bearing it was. Because of that, Axminster, and because of the price of the bearings, I think as well, because they're so cheap, Axminster said, right, we'll just send you a full set of bearings, and they turned up about 2 days later. So this is one bearing, which I believe is the one in this end, and that's possibly the problem one, and then I've got 2 more here which are different bearings there for this end. So the first thing is to remove the tension from the belt. Now you can't obviously slide the belt off totally because it's stuck on this spindle this way. I can take it off the drive pulley, no problem, like that, but it's therefore stuck on this. So this is why I'm also covering how you need to replace the belt as well. Now the first thing is we've got to remove this handle on the end here, and on there we've got 2 grub screws, one each side, and to do that you just use a 3mm Allen key. The threads on these are really tight, so they're not going to work loose and just suddenly drop out, and you don't have to unscrew them very far either to actually get that off. Once that's done, I can loosen this drive wheel on here for which the belt sits on, and again on here there are 2 more grub screws, just there and there. Now, I believe, I mean, I haven't seen this yet, so again, it will be a case of what it's like when I get there. I believe that there's some form of a groove or something on the actual spindle inside for where they sit. So I'm not sure, but obviously the important thing on this as well is that when this goes back in again, you've got to make sure it lines up with the actual motor pulleys, because if they're off slightly, then it's just going to cause more wear on the belt. Once I've got that loose, I can then put the spindle lock on to stop it from rotating, and on the end here I've got a nylon nut. There's some big grooves on here, and it will just be a case of, with a screwdriver at an angle on there, and just gently hammer, and I have loosened that once just to see whether it would budge. Once that's off, then hopefully I'll then be able to pull the spindle out and slide this off the spindle, giving access to everything inside, which at that point then I'll then have to see where I can get to the bearings. So the first thing, as I say, is loosen this off first. I'm just going to, that's probably had about a rotation and a half there of the actual grub screw. There you go, that just slides off just like that. So for these ones, because these are a lot deeper in there, you have to use the Allen key the opposite way if you've only got small Allen keys like I've got. And it's find the slot down there. So that's in place, and there's no way I can turn that with my fingers. So I will just use a pair of pliers to grab the top and undo that. So that's just had probably a rotation, right, 2 rotations there, so hopefully that won't fall out and stay in place. Find the other grub screw, do the same. 1, 2, that's not. So I might have to loosen this more as I go along. Don't know how that, oh there you go, that will slide on there now. So it does fit in a V block, so there's only one way by the looks of it it's going to sit on the spindle. So the next thing I need to do is now take this nut off on the end here. So I'm just going to put the spindle lock in. So this spindle won't move now. And just in the groove on the nut, just gently tapping this round. So that's really tight on there. So I'm just going to carry on until I've got this fully off. So I've not actually took this nut off yet, but I've now got it to the point where the last little bit you can just take off with your fingers. And when I was hammering it, I was just gently tapping away at it so that it just rotates around at probably 2 or 3 mil at a time. So that's now off. I can now see the bearing on the end there. That's the bearing, that's possibly the suspect one. And we've got the spindle here now. Now I just take the spindle lock out. This should just, there you go, it's starting to come out. And that's it. And it's just obviously using a rubber mallet there so that it doesn't do any damage. So this is just literally popped out as it is. These are the pieces that lock in when I lock the spindle down with the spindle lock bar. That's one of the bearings. Certainly seems to be running smoothly. And I guess I'd have to pull more of this out to get to the next one. I can see it's inside there. Right, okay, so I can see now that I've got 4 screws on this spindle, which will stop this from coming off. Yeah, they're a posi 2. Take them out without dropping them. Don't really want to go fishing for parts. So that's those 4 out, nice and easily done. There we go. So that bar there, which keeps the pulley here from slipping, so it locks it in place, just lifts out, which now means the whole spindle can be taken out. So that is the spindle, which I will give a little bit of a clean up as well. This is the bar that sits in there. If I can get the pulley out. So you can see we've got the groove there on the pulley, which sits over that bar to stop it from slipping in that format. And these holes here is what the indexing system uses. I've got one more bearing in this end, which I guess you're going to have to try and knock out somehow. So that one just slides out. Right, so I'm just going to try and tap it out with this first of all. That's moving. Stiff that side. A bit of wood's not long enough. See if I can wiggle that out. There you go, there's the other bearing out. That is the bearing for that end, which I can just slot in. That just literally pushes in nice and easily. So that's to replace that one. Hopefully this will go in a lot easier. Yeah, that's gone straight in there. That goes in there next. I'll just take that out again so I don't lose it. This is the other bearing. I've got another sort of washer on there first. Right, will that bearing come off? I've just got to somehow try and prise that bearing off there, and I'll come back. So I've got this last bearing off, and I've got to say it was a bit of a nightmare to get off. And when it was on the spindle here, I literally had, the only gap I had between the spindle and the bearing was I managed to get a couple of my steel rules just about wedged in there, and you literally had to just keep tapping it down on a hard surface to slowly wiggle the bearing down. And as I say, there's no wiggle space in there whatsoever, so I'm going to replace that as well as I've got them. So it's on with a new bearing, and it's here. Hopefully you'll see it's tight as it goes on, because that's still got a way to go. And actually, what I might do, I'm going to drop that back into the lathe for the moment, because it will give me a lot better straight surface. The bearing now is sort of central to where it's got to be. I can then just knock that down as and when required. So that's going to go in that way. So I must remember to put the belt back on as well. Right, so this is by one of the locking nuts. So get this back on first. Then the drive belt. Which is over the spindle, which is the important part. So this will drop back in. That's now in place, which means I can put this drive pulley back to where it should be. That should slot in, so it should be in the right place. So I'm just going to gently tap it in. Before I push this in too far now, I can now get these 4 round-headed screws back in. My neighbour gave me this. I think he got that from Oldies. It's a Work Zone magnetiser. My screwdriver wasn't holding on to these a moment ago. Just literally run your screwdriver through the plus, and all of a sudden I've now got a magnetic screwdriver, which is certainly ideal for situations like this where I don't want to be dropping the screw. This can now go fully back in. Before I tighten that up in place and line that up, I want to get the nylon nut on the end here. And because I need to lock the spindle, I can now tighten the nylon nut up fully, which will hopefully then draw that last bearing into the lathe there. So I've just tightened the nylon nut up again, and I now just lined this up with where hopefully it should be. I just need to lock this in place. Hopefully that one will stop from moving. Get the other one. Right, I can tighten them down again wherever my pliers are. Just make sure they're not going to move. Not silly tight, but just enough to nip it up. So if I put all I need to do now is put the actual handle back on the end here and get the belt on, which I'm going to just slide the belt on first while I'm in here. Now got to get this handle back on, and again I will try and use these marks where it was tightened up before. That's the handle back on, and hopefully we should that seems to be running a lot better. Now hopefully that's shown you what's involved with the process you're going to need to, if you're going to need to change the belt on one of these lathes, and also what the extras are for getting the bearings out. Really just getting the bearings out was just because they're so tight, especially the bearing that's there right on the end of the spindle. I had no play whatsoever getting the bearing off, and the only thing I could do was actually get my 2 steel rules just about wedged inside to hold onto the top and just gently tap it down on a hard surface for it to actually slowly dislodge. Eventually I got enough room in there for my fingers, and then I could then just do the same process to get it down. It would then jump a big section, and then finally the last piece would come off. And as you can see how tight the whole piece went back in. I mean, I had to use a rubber mallet to knock the actual spindle all the way in. So I've got to say, yes, it was a fault with the lathe. It was reasonably easy to rectify it, but I've got to say, Axminster Service, first class as I've always experienced it. Thanks a lot for watching.